name is Carson.
Hi, I'm Jonathan.
Hi, I'm Cody. Database. We're going to create a database to ask 4 simple queries, and we're going to use information that we input into the database to answer those queries. We're starting off by adding our 3 tables that we're going to need in order to answer the queries. We're starting off with our students table, then we're going to have our student ID, our first name, and our last name of the student. We're going to change the student ID to being just a number field since it's going to only contain numbers. We're going to input all of our students' information into the students table. Using our tables, we're going to answer 4 queries, and they're only going to be related to Mr. Potter. Our first one that we're going to ask is going to be how often did Mr. Potter study for his classes this semester? Our second will be how often should Mr. Potter have studied for his class? Our third one will be how much additional time should Mr. Potter study for his classes? And then the fourth one, overall, how much additional time should Potter study for? After we get our 3 tables of information inputted, we will move on to actually designing the queries. We're done with our students table, so we're going to move on to our next table. Which is going to be the classes table. We're going to have our class ID, our course name, our section number, our term, and our credit hours. We're going to change the data type on several of these to being numbers since they will only contain numbers. Then we're going to input all of our information for each of the classes. Then we're going to move on to our third table, which is going to be our student and classes table. We're going to have our ID, which is going to be a number type. We're going to have our class ID, which again will be a number type. We're going to have our student ID, which will be another number type. And we're going to have the hours studied, which will be another number type. And then we're going to input all of our information for this table. Now that we have all of our information input, we can move on to our queries. We do need to make this hour studied a decimal place field, and we can change the decimals to only having 2. And we also need to make note that in order to find the required time studied for each class, it's going to be our credit hours per class times 2. We'll use that in our second query. Right now, we're going to use our first query, which is how often did Mr. Potter study for his classes. So we're going to add all of our tables to our query. And then we're going to start adding the actual things that we need to our query. So we're going to start off with last name. We're going to go to course name, have credit hours, and hours studied. And to make sure that we only pull up Mr. Potter's information, we're going to type in Potter so it doesn't pull up all the other students as well. And we're going to run it, and we're going to have all the information for hours studied per course for Mr. Potter. We're going to save that as Potter studied time per class.
So for the second query, you're going to go to Create, Query Design, and under the Query Design table, you're going to add class, students, and students and classes. And what that'll do, you'll see 3 tables that connect. The fields that you're going to add for this query are first name, or excuse me, last name, course name, credit hours, and hours studied. Next to hours studied, you're gonna right click a blank field, and you're gonna go to zoom. Under the zoom, you're gonna add required study time so it can show how much time Harry Potter needed to study. And so it's required study time colon bracket credit hours end bracket and then asterisk 2. So it multiplies it by 2. And the format you want to do is a fixed format, just so it's accurate. And once you click run, you run the query, it'll show another tab with the required study time. But it's going to show all of the students. And what you want to do is add under the criteria Potter. So it'll only show time that Harry Potter has studied. You want to save the query by right clicking the tab, and you'll save it as I think it was, yeah, Potter required study time. And that's how you do the second part.
Okay, now we're going to move on to our third query. So add the 3 tables. So this query is going to be Harry Potter study time deficiency. So we're going to add his last name, course number, or course name, credit hours. We're going to right click, go to Zoom, name it required study time, colon, bracket, credit hours, close it with the bracket, times 2. Click OK. And we're going to go to properties and change the format to fixed so it can be a decimal. And for now we're going to add hours studied. We're going to right click again, go to Zoom. This one's going to be called study time deficiency. We do the same thing, a colon, we're going to put required study time in brackets, minus hours studied in brackets. Then we're going to click OK. Oh, we're going to go down to last name criteria and put in Potter. Then click run. And there you go. It shows you his study time deficiency. Now we're going to save it and name it as Potter study time deficiency.
Add in our tables, and we're going to get that information. We're going to use last name. And again, we only want Mr. Potter's information, so we're going to type in Potter to filter out everybody else. We're going to get the sum of the credit hours. Which is going to be the sum of the overall credit hours. Then we're going to get the sum of the required study time, which in order to get the required study time is the credit hours times 2, and then we're going to add that total up. So we do the sum of the actual credit hours and multiply that by 2, and then it adds all together. And then we're going to get the sum of the hours studied. Then we're going to get the sum of the study time deficiency, which is going to be the sum of the required amount of study time minus the sum of the actual hours studied. We're going to get the totals. That way it groups it all into one, and we're going to change all of our calculations to be the expressions that we created. We're going to run it, and it's going to give us the sum of the credit hours, the sum of the required hours, the sum of the hours studied, and the time deficiency hours. And we're going to save that as Potter sum total.